I am making this video to share my experience with quitting my job without another job lined up, and to show that it is possible to do so if you have a plan in place to survive without working after you quit your job. So in my previous video, I tried to answer the question of when you should quit your job, or how do you know when you should quit your job? And my answer to that was very simple. It was when you've reached your breaking point. So I shared 5 reasons that led me to my breaking point, and which led me to resign, which was ultimately concerned about my health and stress, which was getting to a point that was untenable and unmanageable. But it's one thing to know when to quit, or know that, you have to quit when your breaking point is reached. But it's another thing to have a plan in place so that you can survive without working. Because once you decide to quit, you either need to have a plan in place so that you can quit and then not work for a period of time, or you would need to secure a job first before you quit, so that you can still have a source of income after you quit. Okay, so the answer to this question, how do you survive quitting a job, or how do you quit a job without another job lined up? So the answer to that is pretty simple. It's to have a financial cushion, basically, that can last for a while before you need to look again for another job. So for me, I didn't really have the option of looking for a job. So it's kind of twofold. I didn't really have an option of looking for a job before I quit my job because of a few things. So the job market of like 2025, since the slowdown of 2024 to 2026 has been very slow, as you might have read from different online forums and posts and news articles. And that plan to look for a job before I quit wasn't really possible for me because as I mentioned in my previous video, I was working so many hours overtime. So I would work, instead of working from like 9 to 5 like a regular job, I would often work from like 9 to like 7, 9 to 8, sometimes 9 to 9. So I would end work and then not have any time to do anything else besides get dinner, do some chores, do a little bit of recreation. And by that end of that, I didn't really have the time or energy to look for a job anyways, right? To apply for jobs and to interview for a replacement job. And for me, I didn't really want to rush into another job just to escape one that I didn't like, because I knew that if I approached the situation in that way, I would probably just accept the first job that would hire me, right? Because I was so desperate to get out of this one, I would probably just say yes to whatever job hired me in the few hours that I might have been able to spend looking for jobs in the evenings, which would potentially lead to an even worse situation than the one that I was in. So a worse situation. So I wanted to spend some time thinking about what I wanted to do as a career. So spend some time, doing some introspection in terms of what I wanted to do as a job, as a career, in terms of what matched what I was looking for from a job. And that wasn't possible unless I took some time off, right, without working. So the option to look for a job and have another job secured before I quit wasn't really an option for me. But for you, it might be, right? So your plan for quitting a job might be just simply to find a job that is better than your current job for whatever reason that is making you want to quit your current job. As well, the second reason that the option to look for a job before I quit look for a replacement job before I quit didn't work for me was that I wanted to, like, part of my plan was wanting to take some time off, and then during the time off was to travel here. So I wanted to travel for a long period of time, and then like a period of time that was longer than what I knew was possible for like a regular job's vacation time. So I wanted to go for like a few months. So I knew that, especially if I got a new job, I wouldn't be able to take like a consecutively, like a few months consecutive vacation immediately or soon after I got hired. So that kind of was another reason why I couldn't look for another job before I quit, right? And you know, as I mentioned, I didn't really want to. I wanted to, take some time to take a sabbatical and take some time, like personal time, to reflect and do my own thing, pretty much. So that's kind of the topic of the next video in terms of like what I did on my sabbatical. So in this video, I'll talk about my plan to basically finance that period of time that I wanted to take a sabbatical and travel. Okay, so what did I do? So in order to make my plan, I had to do basically two things, right? In terms of designing or, planning the plan. Planning the plan. So the two things I needed to do was I had to decide on how long I wanted to not work for. And then I needed to estimate and forecast how much money I needed to save or how much money I needed to spend during that time so I could then figure out how much money I needed to save before I quit my job, right? So this planning was, during and needs to be done while you're planning to quit your job, right? It can't, it can't be done after you quit your job because you won't have the income to finance this plan. Okay. So when I say plan, I mean like after you made up the mind that you want to quit your job, but before you actually reach your breaking point, and actually quit your job, you have to plan and also and try to execute this plan, right? Or try to save up this plan so that you can execute it after you quit your job. So this was done basically pretty much 3 months or 6 months after I started this job. That was basically when I decided that I wanted to quit my job, and also that I decided what I wanted to do after I quit my job, right? So once I decided that I wanted to take some time off and also to travel, I needed to know how much money that I needed to spend on my vacation, and also how much to save for that here, right? And also like plan to work towards saving that amount. Okay, but first things first. So the timeline here. So the first thing I needed to do was plan on the timeline or how long I wanted to not work for. So for me, I wanted to take a year off and also travel for 3.5 months during that time. So I plan to travel, right now it's June of 2026. So I plan to travel from September to December of 2026. So I originally thought of planning for just 1 year of expenses, plus expenses for the trip that I wanted to take. However, as I thought about it, I didn't think that I was going to be able to get a job immediately after coming back from vacation. So, and also I wouldn't have any money, right? If I planned for only financing the time that I wanted to take off here. So instead, I estimated it might take me like about 6 months after my vacation to land a job. So instead of planning for 1 year of time off, I planned for 2 years of time off so that I had a full year of like runway after my vacation, even though I only estimated that I would need 6 months to get a job afterwards here. So I was more on the I guess careful side or conservative side in terms of planning my return to getting an income basically and getting the next job. Okay, so in total, my timeline was 1.5 years of not working, but my estimate was a full 2 years of expenses that I needed to save for in order to execute my plan, right? In order to have that timeline that I wanted. Okay, so the next part is breakdown of the expenses and your financing for the period of time that you want to take off. So for the 2 years that I forecasted, here were my estimates. So the first category in my estimates were bills and mandatory expenses. So for this category, I have an advantage because I still live with my parents. In this category, I estimated $650 a month. And this goes towards paying for the family phone bill, my gym membership, gas for the car, home internet, and rent for my parents here, rent towards my parents. Okay, so obviously for other people, rent or mortgage might cost like $1,500 to like $3,000. So in those cases, I would say it's still possible, but it would take a longer time to save up for this expense category, right? For the amount of time that you want to live without working, right? Or the amount of time that you plan on not working after you quit your job. So living with my parents is still a big advantage here for me. Well, I'm almost 32 and I'm still living with my parents, so I'm not sure if I can really call this an advantage. But in this financial case, it is. So I also don't have kids, don't have a mortgage, and as mentioned, my other bills that I manage are low. So I don't really have to save up so much to sustain paying for this expense category while I was working. So, sorry, I said $650 a month. So I forecasted $700 a month here for a total of $16,800 for the 2 years that I plan on not working. Let me just make sure my math is correct here. Yes. So 700 times 24, right? So 16,800 for this first category of bills and mandatory expenses. And then for the second category that I forecasted was spending, okay, which was also forecasted at $700 a month. So the same total as the first category at $16,800 of a month for the, not a month, $16,800 for the whole period that I planned on, for the 2-year period that I planned on taking off. So this category is an earmark category for spending that is outside of those bills that are fixed expenses. So this would include things like buying, stuff on Amazon, going out to eat, buying clothes, groceries, and like services like fixing your car, or like, just doing like regular maintenance. Okay, fixing your car is another category that I'll mention in a bit. And once again, for me, this category is not so high since I share most of my expenses with my parents, namely groceries, which is covered in the rent that I pay each month as well, my low rent that I pay. So most of this spending is when I need to buy things, really, like a new SD card for the camera or hanging out with my friends. So obviously you want to try to spend as close to zero as possible while you're not earning any money, right? So like during the 5 or 4 months that I've been not working since I quit my job, I've been trying to, spend as close to $0 as possible, right? Except for things that I couldn't avoid. Like I needed to buy a new SD card for this camera and maybe some meals with my family. But like other than that, like I don't go out for any drinks or go out to eat as much as possible, and try to, cook at home and basically just try to save as much money as possible. But although you want to try to, spend as close to zero as much as possible while you're not spending any money, you should still earmark this category and save for this category in your budget, because you will still need to spend money on things outside of your fixed expenses, right? So like, as I mentioned, like groceries is a common one that you would still need to spend on because you need food to survive. Okay, so with that said, you still need to earmark this category in your plan, even though you're planning to not spend not, use the budget up to its maximum here, right? So for me, actually, even though I budgeted like $700 a month, which was what I thought like a large amount for spending for someone that has no income, somehow like in a few months I've managed to go over that budget, right? So for you, you might need to kind of estimate what you spend in a month and try to be realistic with that estimate in your plan so that you don't end up like me and then having some months where you're going over your estimate for this budget category. Okay, continuing on with the budget categories for my plan forecast, financial forecast. The third category for my budget forecast was for my trip, which was planned at $21,000 here. So I won't get into the breakdown of my trip here, but I planned a 3.5 month trip from Central Asia to East Asia from September to like the middle of December this year. And this added up to around $21,000. So this is Canadian, by the way. So I guess this might result in a more realistic budget if you account for rent, like, or a mortgage, and discount this vacation instead, as this $21,000 is $875 a month across the 24 months that I planned in my like sabbatical financial breakdown. So if you kind of rearrange my plan like that, then it might equal to some people's rent if you add that to like the bills category instead, that 875 to the bills category instead. So in total, I plan to save around $55,000 for a 24-month period where I would not work, which works out to around $2,275 a month. So I think that like that number in total is pretty comparable to someone that pays rent or maybe has a small mortgage and is, spending as least as possible to survive. So I think in general, I think planning to save like $2,000 to $2,500 Canadian a month for each month that you plan on not working is a rough, good estimate that you can then fine tune for your own individual finances and your own plan. So with that estimate of $2,000 to $2,500 a month, it's $24,000 a year at $2,000 a month and $30,000 a year at $2,500 a month. So you can adjust that depending on however many months/years that you plan on not working in your plan for after you quit your job as well. Okay, so in this part of the video, I'll talk about what I ended up saving. So even though my goal was $54,600 at $2,275 a month, I started saving, as I mentioned, in August of 2022, which was June, July, August, which was about like only 3 months after I started my job, which is ridiculous because I wanted to quit my job 3 months after I started, right? Which kind of points to how, I guess, bad it was. But on the flip side, it took me 3.5 years after I started saving in August of 2022 before I had enough money to execute my plan when I quit in November of 2025. In actuality, I wanted my plan to save that 55K was going to be finalized in like March of 2026. So I actually had to quit because I passed my breaking point 3.5 months before I planned to quit because of the fact that I reached my breaking point. Okay. So at the time that I quit in November of 2025, so 4 months ago, I deposited 48K into my account. So 48,000 used to save for this plan. So in the 39 months that I was saving, I averaged around $1,231 Canadian a month, or around $308 a week. Of course, some weeks, this is an average, so some weeks and months I could save more and some I could save less depending on what expenses and what bills I had at the time, at that payday. but this was the average. So again, it took quite a long time. And again, I don't think it would have been able, I wouldn't think I wouldn't have been able to do it in this short amount of time in terms of like saving the amount that I forecasted for my plan, because is the reason that of my manager here, right? So if I didn't have that great manager in the middle, as I mentioned in my previous video, that led me or enabled me to last in my job for the 3.5 years that I was saving for this plan. I think that I would have been forced to quit earlier, right? So I wouldn't have nearly as much money saved for my plan as I do now if I didn't have that amazing. Well, not. Yeah, he was. I mean, he was pretty amazing compared to the other managers, and he was pretty chill. That really nice manager that kind of was my saving grace in terms of how I was able to save for this plan here. But there was other reasons as well that kind of gave me an advantage here, which, as I mentioned before, which was one of them being my low monthly bills and expenses, because I live at home and I pay a very low amount of rent to my parents here. Okay, but in addition to that, what helped me to be able to save was a high income here, right? So in the job that I quit, I had an income from that job of $100,000 Canadian yearly. And I tried to keep my spending low while I was earning so I could save as much as I could, because I knew that I was planning on quitting my job, and I knew that I needed to save for this plan. But in addition to the job that I quit, I also was teaching coding in the evenings at a local community college. So that pushed my yearly income to around $120,000 Canadian. So at each month, I was netting around like $6,500 Canadian after tax. But obviously, I didn't save that full amount. Expenses and bills cut into that. So before I could save for my plan, I had to, pay for credit cards and pay for rent and all my bills and expenses. And in addition, I also put money aside into my retirement and first home savings account before I saved for my plan here. Near the end of the plan, I didn't save as much to my my retirement accounts and savings account as much, because I prioritized saving for the plan, because I wanted to quit as soon as possible. So I wanted to save as much money as soon as possible. But on average, I saved $1,231 per month in those 3.5 years or 39 months that I was saving. And the key was really 2 jobs with a high income that really helped increase how much I was able to save per month. So although it still took me over 3 years to save up my plan, it would have been much longer without that second job enabling me to save more each month here, right? So my net income per month was higher because I had a second job. And then another reason that I was able to save this the amount here, even though I mentioned that my goal was $55K, but I deposited only $48K right into my account over 3 years. But I ended up with a total of $58,000 Canadian by the time that I quit my job, which was more than my forecast. So the reason for this was because I put these savings in index funds and US blue chip stocks, and they gave me an extra $10K in returns over 3 years, which is about like a 21% return in total. And in fact, at the time of this recording, my account has grew without any additional contributions over the last 3.5 months to right now it's sitting at $52K, which has given me even more breathing room in my plan here, right? So from that $48K to $52K. All without adding any extra contributions in it here, just due to the growth of the stock market here. So on the one hand, investing your savings can give real returns if you let your money work for you. And if you also have like a longish horizon, like I did. I didn't plan to work for 3 years, but I guess that's how long it took here. But at the same time, obviously, investing comes with risks. account can't pay for my bills, right? Unless I close the positions and convert stocks into, back into cash and sell my stocks, but they might drop before I do so, right? So I might plan to use my securities in like 6 months, but by that time it might drop down to like 42 or like 32K. So who knows what will happen here, right? So there's inherent risk with investing. So for me, I think I got lucky with the timing of how well the economy grew from 2022 to 2024. And also recently with how the economy and stock market was reacting to world events in the period from like November 25 to now in June 26, since I stopped having an income. So I got lucky in that the growth of my account helped to give me more freedom to or more breathing room to enable to execute a plan without having to save that money by working. Okay, so the keys to my plan that enabled me to have more money in my account by the time that I quit my job than what I forecasted I needed for the period of time that I wanted to quit my job for or not work for were these. So 3 keys. The first one was low bills. So for me, I live with my parents, so obviously that's not possible or not the case for other people, right? So, but you can also try to have low bills by keeping your monthly expenses down, right? So any discretionary or unnecessary expenses you can try to cut down to increase the amount left over to save towards this plan, right? Each payday. And the second key was a high income or having an additional job here, right? So if you don't have an income that results in a amount that enables you to like a net amount that enables you to put away a lot of money or enough money that you think is enough per month towards your plan, then what you could do is try to get a second job to boost your income so that the time it takes to save for your plan is shortened here, right? So you don't have to work for 12 months to save. You can work for 8 months to save if you have additional income coming in so that you can increase the amount of money that you have left over after bills each payday to put towards your plan. And then the third key for me is growth of savings and luck in stock market. So I guess you can't really, decide whether or not you have luck in the stock market or not. But if you can tolerate the risk, investing in diversified ETFs and blue chip stocks for the long term can compound your savings by having your money work for you, right? So instead of just saving your money by working your job, you can save that money and then have that money work for you to grow and compound the money that you have in your plan so that you can further shorten the amount of time that you need to save towards that plan, and then therefore enabling you to quit your job earlier here. So in addition to the plan, I saved an emergency fund of $25,000. And I didn't include this in the figures mentioned previously because this was a separate account that exists and also should exist for you as a separate account from your plan to quit your job as a different financial goal. I saved like this 25K in addition to the 55K, but I didn't need to build it from scratch during the time that I was working the job that I quit because I started building it before, right? So from money saved from previous jobs as well. So that's why I didn't mention it here. But I'm mentioning it in this video because I thought it's important to mention, to include in a financial plan to quit your job, because this emergency fund is an in-case fund for things that you don't have as line items or sections in your budget. So things like big emergency medical bills, large car repairs. So not talking about just like, regular maintenance, talking about like, if you have to get your control arm replaced or your timing chain or timing belt replaced or something like that costs like a few $1,000s. Legal bills, vet bills, anything large like that wouldn't be included in a plan to quit your job, because that plan would only account for kind of like regular expenses that you can forecast for and that you plan to spend for, right? So these things are unplanned expenses that you don't plan to spend for, but you still need a fund to address those things while you're not working, because you don't have any income while you're not working. So you do need this emergency fund in order to address those emergency expenses, in addition to a fund that can just support you surviving here, right? So you have two different funds for different goals here, one for surviving and one for emergencies. So my recommendation is that you should save for an emergency fund first if you don't yet already have one, before starting to save for your plan to quit your job. So the emergency fund is there to save your life, but the escape plan is something that's more of like something that you want, right? So the priority should be lower than an emergency fund. So if you don't have yet an emergency fund, my advice is to work on that first before making a plan to quit your job, so you can secure yourself financially to handle an emergency, even with income, right? Even with a paycheck. So if you don't have emergency income, but you have a job, you'll have to cut into your job's income, right? And then you might not have any job left over, any money left over to pay for your regular bills. Okay, so it's important to have an emergency fund even if you don't plan on quitting your job. But it's especially important to have one when you do plan on quitting your job, because you won't have your paycheck to draw on if you do have an emergency. Another alternative is a line of credit or LOC as well, to act as your emergency fund if you want to still have an emergency fund but don't want to save for it here, and you want to save for quitting your job. You want to prioritize saving quitting your job, which is, again, not recommended. But you can apply for a line of credit, which is not free. You have to pay that back with interest here. So it's more money than if you otherwise would have saved the emergency fund money yourself. But if you plan on getting a line of credit here, you should do so while you have a job, since they will probably need an income verification in order to approve you for a line of credit. So for me, I actually did both. So I saved the $25,000, and I also have a $25,000 line of credit in addition, for a total emergency fund of $50,000 here. So I don't plan on using the line of credit unless I absolutely, burn through my original own $25,000 in emergency fund money. So that's like a emergency fund, like a double emergency fund. And as well, I recommend not investing your emergency fund and keeping it in a cash or cash equivalent account, like a high interest savings account or cash or bond ETF instead. So like something liquid, right? So something like cash or cash adjacent, in order to not risk losing your money to bad stock markets when you need it the most. Even though, it's tempting to see that, once you've saved your emergency fund, you'll see like, you have 10K or 15K or 20K sitting there in cash, and you're saying like, oh, I want to, make this work for me. But the point of the emergency fund is to have it there and quickly accessible, so that you can pay off any expenses that you have in an emergency quickly without having to wait for it here. Okay, so with that being said, the last part of this video is I wanted to share tips on how to survive while saving for this plan. So as I mentioned in the beginning, this plan is designed and thought of while you're working, right? So when you're working, you decide, maybe this job isn't for me. I have these reasons that I want to quit, and I want to quit my job. But I need to make a plan before I quit my job so that I can save, so I can know how much to save, and then I can save and work towards that goal that I have planned for, right? So you need to plan and then, save towards this plan before you quit your job. So if you're saving and planning before quitting your job, it means that you're working at the job that you dislike here, right? So how do you survive while you're saving for this plan here, right? So how did I survive for the 3 years that I had to keep working at a job that I disliked, that was making me stressed, that was making my body worse here, while saving to quit that job here? Okay, so I use these 3 techniques to help me track my progress. Okay, so these 3 techniques were visualization buckets for financial goals, a countdown calendar, and also rewards for not quitting. So the first strategy to help me survive while working, while saving for my escape plan or my plan to quit my job, was to visualize saving up for my goals of my vacation savings and my other buckets, right? My bills and expense bucket, and also my spending bucket here as well. So I set up a chart that helped me track my financial goals, and I updated it each week. So I found that using a paper chart that you can fill in as you make progress helps me to visualize it better and helps you, and also gives you some motivation to keep going. So here's an example here. So down here would be just like a something on a piece of paper that you draw here, and then you could have your different goals, and then you could have the amounts on top. But the best thing about having it on paper is that you can fill in the bar here or whatever, however you want to track it, and then you can see as you're progressing how much you've saved towards each of the goals that you have in your plan there. The second strategy here, as you saw on the piece of paper, was a countdown here, right? So counting down the days until you quit. But this idea didn't really come to me until I had an idea of when I could quit here. So the plan with the $55,000 figure that I presented earlier did not come all at once. Okay, so it developed over time. I didn't know that I needed $55,000 in August of 2022 when I originally had the thought of wanting to quit my job. But it developed over time and in a messy way. Actually, I wanted to quit in January of 2024. So I made a countdown planner to count down for that day, for some day in January 2024. So it looked like this here. So I separated each week into a row here. And then since each week had 5 work days, I would make a tally of 5 marks here for each week. And then you would have as many number of rows as you would have weeks remaining until your planned day that you could quit your job. At the beginning of each day, or at the end of each day, you could make a tally here in your chart, like you're a prisoner here. But this also helps to visualize the days remaining in your job as well, right? So you can see by counting down the number of weeks or number of days remaining until a day that you plan on quitting your job. You can kind of motivate yourself to get through the countdown and, get through the remaining days and, push through the end of the countdown as well. However, when it was nearly time, or when it nearly got to January of 2024, I realized that I didn't have enough saved. So I pushed the day that I would quit first to September of 2024, then to January of 2025, and then to June of 2025, and then finally I pushed it to March of 2026 here. I had a lot of countdown calendars, a lot of pieces of paper with a lot of tally marks in my recycling bins. But I kept on extending the timeline so that I could save more, because I realized that I didn't have enough money there, so that my goals kept on evolving, right? So first it might have been maybe 30,000 that I needed to save, and then it became 40,000, and then 45, and then 50, and then $50,000. So that kept on extending my timeline as I realized more and more things. So for example, I realized that instead of 1 year of time that I needed to save for not working, I needed to save for 2 years of time when I needed to, that 2 years of time of not working when I only planned for 1 year that I wouldn't work here, right? So having that realization pushed the day that I would quit further and further down the road, leading me to having to create more countdown calendars to the day that I quit here, right? As that became clearer and clearer here. But I think what was really happening as I was extending the timeline here was that I wasn't yet at my breaking point here, right? Referring to what I was talking about in my last video. So I was able to continue, right? So if I had been at my breaking point at January 2024, I really wouldn't have the option of extending, right, my quit date into the future. I would have had to just quit on the job because I would have been too stressed and would have been already beyond my capabilities to handle the stress there at that time. The important thing in all this was that I realized that I needed to have a plan early on, right? So if I realized that I wanted to quit too late, then I wouldn't have enough time to save for the plan there. I would have only, I would have had less money by the time that my breaking point was reached there. So what I'm saying is, like, at the beginning, maybe you're at like 0, and then at your breaking point, you're at 100, right? So if you realize that you want to quit near the beginning when you're near 0, then you have more time before you get to 100 to save for the plan for quitting your job. If you realize that you want to quit like when you're already at like 75% of the way to your breaking point, you only have like 25% of your capacity in terms of time to save for the plan, and then which is less time than you otherwise would have had if you realize that you want to quit your job early on here, right? So I guess pay attention to like the signs that make you say that, I want to quit my job, even if they come early on when you, I guess, begin a new job. So the third technique or strategy for surviving while you're saving to quit your job is to buy rewards for yourself for not quitting here. So I rewarded myself for surviving and not quitting each week by buying myself a small prize on the weekend. So on Friday, if I survived the week, I would tell myself I could buy myself something as a prize or a reward that week for not quitting my job. So this would be something small, like a bubble tea, like a pair of drumsticks, a new book, an app, something small here, right? An in-game purchase or something like that. So something small, like $5, $10 that you could use to reward yourself as a treat. So this makes staying at the job part of the motivation as well, because it finances the reward here, right? So if you don't quit, then you have the money next week to continue buying yourself a treat, right? So if you quit your job, then you no longer have the money to treat yourself, to motivate yourself anymore. So I think it's a good mood booster that can help you survive while you save here. So as you're, enduring your work while you're saving to quit your job, you can, kind of lift your spirits up at the end of each week and tell yourself like, hey, you can do this, you can keep going, with a little reward here. So those are the 3 strategies there to help you kind of survive while quitting your job. So if you're in the same position that I was in, make sure that you have a clear plan that includes a few things here. It includes the breakdown of the timeline that you want to not work for, a breakdown of the amounts you need to save for that timeline. Take action to try to save for that plan as fast as possible so that you have to work for the least amount of time or number of days in a job that you dislike or that is causing your health to deteriorate. Build an emergency fund first if you don't already have one, and use the strategies to survive and endure while you're working and saving for your plan. So that's how I did it, and that's how you can too. So in the next video, I'll talk about what I have been doing since I've quit my job and my reflections on this experience. So thanks so much for watching my video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Thank you.